72,000 tickets sold out in 3 hours. Nobody who bought one knew a single act on the bill. There was no lineup, no announcement of who would play. The organizers had not booked anybody yet beyond the 3 surviving members of Queen. 72,000 people paid to attend a concert on the strength of one name, and that name belonged to the only person in the world who could not possibly appear. Freddie Mercury died on the 24th of November, 1991. He had confirmed publicly that he had AIDS one day earlier. One day. The world found out he was ill and that he was dead almost in the same breath. For most of the previous decade, Queen had answered questions about his health with silence. Then the silence broke, and 48 hours later there was nothing left to protect. What the 3 remaining members did next was not obvious. Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon were not obliged to do anything. Grieving bands usually go quiet. They issue a statement, they disappear for a year or 2, and the world moves on to the next thing. Instead, they went to their manager, Jim Beach, and together they decided to build something enormous in public very fast. In February of 1992, at the BRIT Awards, May and Taylor announced it. There would be a concert at Wembley Stadium to celebrate Freddie's life and to raise money and awareness for AIDS. That was roughly 3 months after his death. Anyone who has organized anything at that scale knows what that timeline means. They were building a stadium show while still in the middle of the worst year of their lives. Then the tickets went on sale, and something happened that nobody had planned for. All 72,000 went in 3 hours. At that point, the only performers announced were the 3 men left in Queen. No Bowie, no Elton John, no Guns N' Roses. None of that had been confirmed or in some cases even asked yet. Sit with what that means for a moment. 72,000 people, spending real money, committing a day of their lives, buying a ticket to a stadium concert with an essentially unknown bill. They were not buying a lineup. They were buying a chance to be in a room where a specific absence would be acknowledged. It is closer to a funeral than a gig, and they filled it faster than most bands can sell out a small arena. There is a practical reason the tickets went first and the lineup came second, and it is not incompetence. You cannot book David Bowie and Metallica and Liza Minnelli into the same afternoon quickly. Diaries, tour, contracts, record labels, travel. Booking a stadium bill normally takes the better part of a year. Queen did not have a year. They had a stadium date and a reason that would not wait. So they announced the event, put the tickets out, and assembled the bill afterwards in public under a deadline. It is the sort of thing you only do when the thing itself matters more than the risk of it failing. The lineup, once it did assemble, is almost absurd to read now. David Bowie, Elton John, George Michael, Robert Plant, Annie Lennox, Liza Minnelli, Def Leppard, Metallica, Guns N' Roses, Extreme, Tony Iommi, U2 appearing by satellite from their own tour. These are not artists who share stages. Several of them occupied genuinely different musical worlds and in a couple of cases actively disliked each other's work. They all said yes. The date was Easter Monday, the 20th of April, 1992. Wembley Stadium, 72,000 people in the ground. Broadcast live to 76 countries. Estimates of the global audience run as high as 1 billion. Which puts it in reach on the same scale as Live Aid 7 years earlier, at the same stadium. Except this time Queen were on stage without the man who had made that afternoon famous. The performances that day still get argued about, and a few have become legend. George Michael sang Somebody to Love. By common agreement, it is one of the greatest vocal performances of his life, and he has said since that it was the proudest moment of his career. Watch it and you can see why. He is not imitating Freddie. He is doing something harder, which is honoring a song by singing it properly in his own voice, while a stadium full of people are visibly grieving in front of him. There was a structural problem with the whole event, and everybody on that stage knew it. Queen's songs were written for a specific instrument, and that instrument was gone. Freddie's range, his phrasing, the way he could move from a whisper to a roar inside a single line. Those songs are not difficult to sing. They are difficult to sing without sounding like an imitation. Every guest singer that day had to solve the same problem in about 4 minutes, live, in front of a stadium that knew the original by heart. Some managed it, some visibly did not. That is part of what makes the recording of that day so watchable now. You are watching very famous people attempt something genuinely hard and not all of them succeed. Elton John and Axl Rose sang Bohemian Rhapsody together. If you want a picture of how strange that day was, that is it. The elder statesman of British piano pop and the frontman of the most aggressive rock band on earth, sharing the same song on the same stage for the same dead man. Axl Rose then came back for We Will Rock You. Elton John stayed for The Show Must Go On. David Bowie's moment was the one nobody saw coming. He performed under pressure with Annie Lennox, the first time he had ever sung it live, 11 years after making it with Freddie, and the first time he could not sing it with him. And then, in front of 72,000 people and a global television audience, he dropped to one knee at the front of the stage and recited the Lord's Prayer. It was completely unplanned as far as the production was concerned. Reactions at the time were mixed. Some found it profoundly moving. Some found it self-indulgent, an odd, jarring thing to drop into a rock concert. Bowie later explained it simply. He had been thinking of a friend of his who was ill, and it came over him. Whatever you think of it, it is one of the strangest and most human things ever broadcast live from a stadium stage. Liza Minnelli closed the show with We Are the Champions. Every performer from the day came out and stood behind her. A stage crowded with people who did not belong to the same genre, the same country, or the same decade, singing a Queen song together. It is the correct ending because it is the only shape that fits. Nobody could replace him, so instead they filled the stage with everybody. The concert did what it was actually for, which is worth stating plainly. It raised an enormous amount of money, which funded the Mercury Phoenix Trust, the AIDS charity that Queen and Jim Beach set up afterwards. That trust is still operating and has funded AIDS work around the world for over 30 years. In 1992, saying the word AIDS on a global broadcast, without shame in front of 1 billion people, was itself the point. Remember what the climate was. This was a disease the press had spent a decade writing about with open contempt. People died of it quietly, and their families often lied about why. Even the Olympic organizers in Barcelona that same summer quietly avoided using Freddie's song, partly to sidestep the awkwardness of his death. And here were 72,000 people in a stadium, and 1 billion at home, watching the biggest names in music say his name out loud and refuse to be embarrassed by how he died. For the 3 men in Queen, the day had a second meaning nobody discussed much at the time. They had not played a stadium since Knebworth in 1986. That show, though nobody knew it then, had been the last Queen concert with Freddie. 6 years of silence sat between those 2 nights at a stadium. So April the 20th was not only a memorial. It was Brian May, Roger Taylor and John Deacon walking back out onto a stage of that size for the first time since their singer had last stood on one with them. John Deacon, in particular, essentially stopped afterwards. He played only a handful of times in the years that followed and then retired from music entirely. For him, that stage was closer to a full stop than a tribute. Which brings it back to the tickets. 3 hours, no lineup, 72,000 people. That number was set before a single famous name was attached, which means the whole thing rested on one question. Did enough people care about Freddie Mercury to show up for him without being promised anything? The answer arrived in an afternoon, and it arrived without a single incentive attached. No headliner to tempt anyone, no reunion promised, no special guest teased in advance. Just a date, a stadium, and a name. He had spent the last years of his life protecting a secret, working in a studio around what his body could manage, and being written about by newspapers waiting for him to die. 5 months later, a stadium sold out in 3 hours for a concert with no acts announced, and the largest names in music queued up to be part of it. He did not get to see any of it, but the size of the answer is worth noting because for once it arrived without anyone having to ask.